Tourist Jacob crossed the line, both literally and figuratively. Believing that his money entitled him to everything, he tossed coins at the feet of a royal guard and mocked him, trying to provoke the soldier into breaking protocol. However, when a veteran intervened and the guard took a step forward, the crowd froze in shock. No one could have anticipated what would happen next, an event that would make even the most indifferent observers reconsider the notions of honor and dignity. But let's start from the very beginning. On a London morning, the sun softly broke through the clouds, casting light on the red uniforms of the guards at Buckingham Palace. Private William Hudson, 30 years old, stood motionless like a statue, dressed in a perfectly tailored uniform with impeccable posture. His face was the embodiment of composure, his gaze fixed in the distance. To most tourists, he was part of the show, but for William, this was a daily job steeped in discipline and pride for his service. The crowd of tourists buzzed like a beehive. Among them was a group of young Americans, one of whom stood out. Jacob, a tall guy with a flashy hairstyle and a confident smirk, eager to become the center of attention. His loud voice rang out above the crowd. "Hey man, come on, smile for once," he shouted, stepping up to the white line that must not be crossed. The guard didn't move, his gaze remaining as steady as stone. Jacob smirked even wider. "Are you even alive? Let's find out." With these words, he reached for William's bearskin hat, hoping to provoke some kind of reaction. The crowd around him stirred. Some people laughed, others began recording on their phones, while a few frowned in obvious disapproval. "This is ridiculous. He's not a clown," muttered an elderly woman, watching the scene. William sighed internally. Every day on duty, he encountered people like Jacob. In his mind, the instructions were clear. Do not react to provocations, maintain dignity. But the troublemaker clearly wasn't planning to stop. "Come on, someone film this," Jacob called to the crowd. "The royal guard who's too serious for life." The crowd began splitting into two groups. One group laughed at Jacob's antics, while the other looked at him with condemnation. "Young man, this is not Disneyland," an older man, about 60, exclaimed, but Jacob just waved him off. "Oh, give it a rest, old-timer. This is all for us tourists." A child in the crowd whispered to their parents, "Mom, why is he being so rude?" William, maintaining absolute composure, felt a growing tension. He knew these tourists saw him as just another decoration, but his role was far more significant. This scene, like a mirror of modern society, highlighted the gap between respect for tradition and a consumerist attitude. "They think money can buy anything, even respect," the guard thought to himself. "Let's be honest. You think he's acting like a complete idiot too, right? Of course. Behavior like that is disgraceful. And the guard? He's still standing there like a rock, showing a level of class these tourists couldn't dream of." This opening establishes the contrast between the dignity of the guard and the chaotic, crude behavior of the antagonist, as well as the crowd's mixed reactions, underscoring the injustice of the situation. The crowd at Buckingham Palace grew louder, as though someone had turned up the volume on the chaos. Sensing the public's attention, Jacob continued his show. His confidence swelled. He felt in control, basking in the growing audience now watching and filming his every move. He bent down, pulled a few coins from his pocket, and dramatically tossed them at the guard's feet. "Come on, pick it up. I'm paying taxes for this kind of entertainment," he yelled, making sure as many people as possible could hear him. The crowd stirred again. Some laughed while others looked openly uncomfortable. "This is too much," muttered an elderly man in a gray coat, shaking his head. "They're not just disrespecting the guard, but the culture itself." Jacob's smirk widened as he basked in the attention. He felt like a star, with not just tourists, but even passers-by stopping to see how this spectacle would unfold. "Oh, don't be so angry, sir," Jacob replied to the older man with a sarcastic tone. "The guards are here for entertainment, right? So, I'm just enjoying the show." Meanwhile, Private William Hudson remained as motionless as ever. His face was as calm as it had been an hour earlier, but his hand tensed ever so slightly on his rifle, a detail that would be invisible to an untrained eye. In his head, the voice of his instructor rang out clearly. "You are the face of the crown. Stay calm." Do not let yourself be provoked. The crowd, observing the unfolding events, was divided. Some supported Jacob, egging him on. Go on, make him move. That'd be awesome. Others looked visibly irritated. This is disgusting. Such disrespect, a middle-aged woman remarked. Who even behaves like that? Added another quietly. Jacob took his antics a step further. He crossed the white line, a boundary strictly forbidden to cross. With a loud slap, he planted himself directly in front of William and began waving his arms in the guard's face. Come on, hit me, soldier boy! What, are you scared? He shouted, his cocky grin unwavering. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. One of the horses in the nearby mounted unit flinched at the noise. Its rider managed to regain control, but the tension in the air was palpable. The horse almost threw its rider, and he's still laughing, an indignant woman in the crowd exclaimed. Jacob, oblivious to what was happening around him, continued his antics. Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was such a sensitive horse, he said mockingly, throwing up his hands in faux apology. Classic, a guy who thinks the world revolves around him. It's like he bought a pass to break every rule possible. You think so too, don't you? Of course. The situation escalated. People openly began criticizing Jacob. This is just shameful, shouted a young man holding his phone. The guards stand here for hours to protect symbols of the nation, not to put up with this. Despite the crowd's growing anger, some continued filming, waiting to see how this confrontation would end. Jacob, feeling like a king in his own mind, failed to realize the tide of public opinion was beginning to turn against him. Rudeness and chaos had reached their peak, leaving the undeniable sense that justice had to prevail. The crowd at Buckingham Palace buzzed like a noisy marketplace. At the center of attention was Jacob, who, feeling like a star, continued his provocations. However, with each of his actions, the mood of the crowd began to shift. Disapproving voices started to surface. An elderly man with a military bearing approached the barrier. Medals glinted on his chest, and it was immediately clear he was a veteran. His face carried an expression of sternness and disapproval. Young man, do you know how many people gave their lives so this man could stand here? His voice rang out, cutting through the air like a knife. The crowd fell silent, as if holding its breath. Jacob turned to face the veteran, and without much thought smirked. Oh, Grandpa, are you his lawyer? These words sent waves of indignation through the crowd. Several spectators began whispering, and others openly glared at Jacob in disapproval. This has gone too far, exclaimed an elderly woman, clutching her handbag tightly. At that moment, something happened that no one expected. William, who had remained motionless until then, slowly lifted his gaze. His eyes locked with Jacob's, and the tension between them became palpable. For the first time all day, the guardsman took a step forward. The movement, so unexpected, sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. Step back behind the line, sir. William's voice was clear and firm, like a blade of steel. These words cut through the air, causing Jacob to freeze. His confidence wavered noticeably, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He took another step forward, standing face to face with the guardsman. And what are you going to do? Hit me, he spat with a sarcastic grin, though there was now a hint of uncertainty in his voice. As the crowd watched the escalating situation with bated breath, a mounted guardsman intervened. He calmly rode up to the barrier, his voice soft but authoritative. Sir, you are disturbing the peace. You will need to leave the premises. The unexpected intervention threw Jacob off balance. The mounted guardsman, gentle but firm, took Jacob by the arm and guided him back across the line. Hey, I'm a tourist. I have rights, Jacob protested, but his voice was drowned out by the approving murmurs of the crowd. Finally, muttered the man in the grey coat. That guy had completely crossed the line. Well, justice has been served. What did you expect? That you can act like a complete fool and face no consequences? Of course not. Even the patience of the guards has its limits. The crowd reacted to the scene with enthusiasm. Some applauded, others filmed on their phones, while a few expressed their gratitude to the guards. Now that's what I call discipline, a woman with a child remarked admiringly. William returned to his post, resuming his motionless stance. It seemed like everything was back to normal, but for a brief moment, his gaze met the veteran's. A small nod passed between them, a silent exchange of gratitude and respect. The conclusion of the scene left a lasting impression, showing that tradition and honor remain steadfast, even in the face of modern chaos. The crowd around Buckingham Palace came back to life, but now its mood was entirely different. Where moments earlier there had been laughter and applause for Jacob's antics, now there was approval for the guards' actions. Jacob and his friends were being escorted out of the palace area. His protests, something along the lines of, "I'm a tourist, you have no right," were drowned out by the murmur of voices and the hum of smartphone cameras recording the event. "Well, he got what he deserved," someone in the crowd remarked. "Seriously, who still thinks you can act like a fool and get away with it? Of course not, and this moment is the perfect reminder of that." The video of the incident, already circulating online, began gathering comments. Viewers expressed their outrage at Jacob's audacity. "How do people like this think such behavior is acceptable? Respect to the guards for their composure. This guy didn't realize he wasn't in a circus." Back at the palace, the situation returned to its usual rhythm. Tourists took photos, chatted about the recent events, and whispered about how impressive the guardsman's response had been. The veteran with medals on his chest approached William, who had resumed his motionless stance. He looked at the guardsman with respect and said, "Thank you for your service, son. You reminded these people that honor is not just a word." William nodded silently. In his eyes was a clear expression of gratitude for the veteran's words. This brief exchange of gestures spoke volumes, more than any words could. And once again, we see how true heroes remain humble. William didn't even reply with words. A single look was enough. That's true strength. The crowd had nearly settled when a small boy, about 5 years old, cautiously approached the white line, holding his mother's hand. His eyes were wide with admiration. The boy stopped and shouted, "Mr. Guardsman, you're a hero!" The child's voice, filled with sincerity, cut through the tension lingering in the air. William, still in his usual pose, barely lifted the corner of his mouth into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Some began clapping, others nodded in approval, and a few even seemed to wipe their eyes, moved by the simple yet profound moment. And there it is, the final touch. One small gesture, one sincere smile, and suddenly all the chaos turns into a moment worth remembering. William isn't just a guardsman. He's a symbol of resilience, speaking without words. As the crowd gradually dispersed, leaving William at his post, everything returned to its usual pace. Orderly lines of tourists, cameras clicking, and admiring glances. And though the day went on, with William returning to his duty, the sense of triumph and restored justice lingered in the air. The story ends on a symbolic note. Honor, dignity, and the steadfastness of tradition remain unshaken, no matter the attempts to undermine them.